The café was all glass and light, the kind of place where suits spoke softly over espresso and success hummed like background music. It sat on the corner of the city's most expensive street, where even the air seemed curated. At precisely 8:17 a.m., as the CEO lifted his cup for the first sip, a voice trembled behind him, so soft it almost disappeared into the clink of porcelain. "Can I sit here just for a minute?" He turned, mildly irritated at first, ready to dismiss the interruption. But the words caught him. They weren't demanding. They weren't rehearsed. They sounded borrowed, as if the girl had practiced them in her head and still feared they might be taken back. She stood there, thin and pale, balancing on a single leg with the careful grace of someone who had learned patience early in life. Her crutch rested against her side, worn smooth by years of use. Her hair was tied hastily, a few strands escaping and brushing her cheek. One sleeve of her jacket was frayed. Her eyes, however, were startling, clear, steady, unashamed. The café seemed to freeze, not because anyone noticed her, but because the CEO did. "Yes," he said slowly, surprising himself. "Sit." She eased into the chair opposite him, exhaling as if she had been holding her breath for days. For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of conversation resumed around them, but their small table felt oddly secluded, like a pause the world had accidentally granted. "I won't take long," she said. "I just needed to rest." He nodded, studying her without intending to. Years of boardrooms had trained his face to reveal nothing, yet something about her presence unsettled him. Not pity, not curiosity alone, but a faint discomfort he couldn't name. "What happened to your leg?" The question escaped before he could stop it, blunt and imperfect. She smiled, not offended, just tired. "Life," she said. "It's quite creative." He blinked, then laughed quietly. "That's one way to put it." She looked at him more closely now, noticing the tailored suit, the watch that cost more than her monthly rent, the way people nearby subtly leaned toward him without realizing why. "You're important," she said, matter-of-factly. "So they tell me." "My name is Lena," she offered. "Daniel," he replied. He didn't add the title. For once, it felt unnecessary. Silence settled again, but it was different now, less awkward, more curious. Lena traced a finger along the rim of her cup, which was empty. She hadn't ordered anything. "You know," Daniel said after a moment, "most people would have avoided this table." She shrugged. "Most tables avoid me." The honesty in her voice struck him harder than any accusation could have. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. Instead, he raised a hand to the passing waiter. "Another coffee," he said, then glanced at Lena. "And whatever she'd like." She hesitated. "Just tea, please." When the waiter left, she looked up at Daniel again, as if deciding something. "Can I tell you something strange?" "I run a corporation," he said. "Strange is my daily diet." She smiled at that. "I used to come here every morning." He frowned. "This café?" She nodded. "Before my accident. I worked 2 streets away, at a design studio. I'd sit by the window and sketch people. I liked drawing hands. They tell the truth even when faces lie. And now I come when I can," she said quietly, "to remind myself I still belong to the city, that it didn't erase me." Daniel felt a tightness in his chest he didn't recognize. He had signed papers that morning laying off an entire department. He had called it restructuring. He wondered how many Lenas had disappeared because of decisions like his. "You do belong," he said before thinking. Then, seeing her raised eyebrow, he added, softer, "And you're beautiful." The word hung between them, dangerous and gentle all at once. She didn't blush. She didn't deflect. She simply looked at him, eyes shining not with gratitude, but with something closer to relief. "People don't say that to me anymore," she said. "Not like that." "I meant it like that," he replied. The tea arrived. Lena wrapped her hands around the cup, drawing warmth from it. Outside, the city surged on. Horns, footsteps, ambition. But at their table, time seemed to loosen its grip. "Why did you really sit here?" Daniel asked. She took a slow sip before answering. Because you looked lonely.
He almost laughed.
Almost. But the sound wouldn't come. Instead, memories surfaced. Late nights in empty penthouses, applause that faded too quickly, a phone full of numbers no one answered after midnight. Maybe I am, he admitted. Lena nodded, as if that confirmed something she already knew. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded sketchbook, its cover bent and ink-stained. I drew you once, she said. You did?
Yes.
Months ago. You were standing across the street, arguing on the phone. Your hands were clenched, but your shoulders looked tired. She opened the book, flipping through pages until she stopped. Daniel leaned forward. The sketch was unmistakable. Him, caught in a moment he had forgotten, lines of tension softened by an unexpected vulnerability. That's remarkable, he murmured. She closed the book quickly, suddenly shy. I didn't mean to keep it. I just couldn't throw it away. Daniel stared at her, the café, the life he thought he understood. Something shifted, subtle but irreversible, like the first crack in ice before it breaks. Lena, he said slowly, what are you doing tomorrow morning? She looked up, surprised, and for a split second hope flickered across her face before she guarded it again. Why? She asked. Daniel hesitated, feeling the weight of every answer he could give, then leaned back in his chair, unaware that this single question was about to unravel everything he thought he knew about power, loss, and the quiet courage it takes to ask for a minute of someone's time. Why? She asked again, more cautiously this time, as if the word itself might cost her something. Daniel studied her face, noticing how quickly she built walls when hope appeared. He recognized that reflex. He had perfected it himself years ago, just dressed in better fabric. Because I'd like to see the city the way you do, he said. And because I think tomorrow might matter. Lena let out a slow breath. I don't usually make plans, she replied. Life has a habit of canceling them for me. I'll take that risk, Daniel said. Coffee. Same place. Same time. She nodded, a small, deliberate motion, as though committing something precious to memory. All right. They finished their drinks in companionable silence. When Lena stood, she steadied herself with practiced ease, lifting the crutch without embarrassment. Daniel rose instinctively, then stopped, unsure whether help would insult or assist. She noticed and gave him a faint smile. I've got it, she said. But thank you for wanting to. She left first, merging into the crowd until her figure disappeared among moving suits and swinging handbags. Daniel remained seated, staring at the empty chair across from him. For the first time in years, his phone buzzed unanswered in his pocket. The next morning, he arrived early. Daniel had built an empire on precision. He was never early for things that didn't promise return. Yet there he was, 15 minutes ahead of schedule, eyes flicking to the door each time it opened. When Lena finally appeared, a different jacket on her shoulders and a faint trace of color on her lips, he felt an absurd rush of relief. You came, she said. So did you. They ordered the same drinks as before. Outside, rain began to fall, thin and steady, blurring the city into watercolor streaks. Lena watched it with quiet fascination. I like rainy mornings, she said. They make everyone equal. Even important people have to look down to avoid puddles. Daniel smiled. Is that your professional opinion? She tilted her head. Artists. He hesitated, then said, I looked you up. Her shoulders stiffened. I don't exist online very well. No, he admitted. You don't. But your old studio does. Your name was still on the website. She nodded slowly. They kept it out of kindness. Or guilt. I never asked which. What happened? He asked gently. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she took out her sketchbook and flipped to a blank page. Her pencil moved softly, almost nervously. I was crossing the street, she said finally. A bus jumped the light. I remember thinking how loud the city was. Then nothing. When I woke up, the doctor said I was lucky to be alive. And unlucky in every other way, Daniel said quietly. She looked up, surprised, then laughed softly. Exactly. Daniel's jaw tightened. He had attended charity galas for amputees, written checks with commas that impressed donors and dissolved pain at a safe distance. None of that had prepared him for the intimacy of this moment. Do you miss it?
he asked. Your old life. I miss who I was in it, she replied. I used to dream loudly.
Now I whisper.
Something about that sentence lodged itself deep in him. They began to meet every morning. Sometimes they talked.
Sometimes they sat in silence, watching people hurry past, Lena sketching, Daniel learning how not to fill every pause with control. The cafe staff started recognizing them as a pair, which amused Lena endlessly. One morning, Daniel arrived looking shaken. What's wrong?
Lena asked. I shut down a factory today, he said.
300 people.
She didn't judge him. She didn't console him either.
She simply asked, did you see their faces?
He swallowed. No. She closed her sketchbook.
Then go back.
He stared at her.
That's not how it works. Maybe that's why it keeps hurting, she said. That afternoon, against every instinct drilled into him, Daniel did something reckless.
He went to the factory. He listened.
He stood in a dusty hall while people shouted and cried and demanded explanations he didn't fully have. It was the hardest meeting of his career. The next morning, he told Lena everything.
You looked, she said. It wasn't a question.
Yes. She smiled, proud in a way no board ever had been.
Good. Weeks passed.
The mornings became the axis around which Daniel's days quietly reorganized themselves. He started sketching too, clumsy and earnest.
Lena teased him without mercy.
One evening, long after the cafe had closed, they walked slowly along the river. The city lights shimmered on the water like broken promises made beautiful. Why me?
Lena asked suddenly.
You could have sat with anyone.
Daniel stopped.
Because you asked for a minute, he said. And no one ever asks me for something that small. She looked at him, eyes reflecting the river's light. I don't want to be someone's lesson, she said softly. Or their charity. He reached out, then paused, giving her time. When she didn't pull away, his hand rested lightly over hers. You're not, he said. You're my mirror.
Her breath caught.
The moment stretched, fragile and luminous.
I'm scared, she admitted.
People leave when they realize I'm complicated.
So am I, he said.
Maybe that's the point. They stood there, hands entwined, unaware that choices were already being set in motion, choices that would test the strength of whispered dreams, redefine beauty in rooms that had forgotten the word, and force both of them to decide what they were willing to risk when a single minute turns into a lifetime. The wind off the river grew colder, brushing against them like a reminder that moments, no matter how powerful, never stand still. Lena was the first to step back, not pulling away completely, just enough to breathe again. Daniel noticed how she did that, how she always created space before it was taken from her.
Walk me home, she asked. He nodded. Of course.
Her apartment was on the 4th floor of an old building with no elevator. Daniel offered to carry her bag, then hesitated again, learning when to ask instead of assume.
She accepted this time.
Each step up the stairs was measured, deliberate. Daniel felt the rhythm of her life in those pauses, how patience had become muscle memory.
Inside, the apartment was small but alive.
Sketches covered the walls, some framed, some taped, some simply leaning where they had fallen. Faces, hands, city corners, moments stolen and preserved. Daniel moved slowly, as if in a gallery, afraid to disturb the air. You live inside your art, he said. I had to, Lena replied. When the world outside became too fast.
She made tea while he stood by the window, looking down at the street they had just walked.
For the first time, he felt like a guest in a life that didn't revolve around him.
It was humbling.
I've been offered a job, Lena said casually, handing him a cup.
He turned.
That's not casual news.
She smiled faintly. It's an illustration contract.
A children's book.
Not much money.
But it feels honest. That's everything, Daniel said.
He meant it. She studied him.
You're changing. So are you. They sat on the sofa, close but not touching. Silence returned, familiar now, no longer something to conquer.
Lena traced patterns on her mug. I worry, she said.
That if this becomes something real, I'll lose it the way I lost everything else. Daniel looked at her hands, remembering her words about truth. I worry that if I don't try, I'll wake up and realize I never lived at all. The weeks that followed were both gentle and turbulent. News articles began to appear, Daniel's company announcing unexpected reforms, rehabilitation programs, community investments.
The board questioned him. Shareholders murmured. Daniel listened, but he didn't retreat. Lena saw the cost before he spoke of it. "You don't have to burn your world down for me," she said one morning. "I'm not," he replied. "I'm finally seeing it."
One afternoon, Daniel invited her to his office. Lena hesitated at the entrance. Glass walls, polished floors, eyes that lingered too long. Daniel watched her shoulders tense. "We can leave," he said immediately.
"No," she said after a moment.
"I want to understand you too." Inside his office, Lena noticed the absence of personal photographs, the way success had erased the human margins. She moved to the window, balancing easily, practiced. "You live very high up," she observed. "I thought that was the goal."
She turned to him. "And now?"
"Now I'm not so sure what the ground looks like anymore."
She took out her sketchbook.
"Sit," she said, pointing to the chair across from her. "You're drawing me. I need to see if you're still the same person."
"He's Saturday."
She worked in silence, her expression focused, almost fierce. When she finished, she handed him the page. This time, he looked lighter,
less armored, almost hopeful.
"I like this version," he said quietly.
"So do I," she replied.
But the world noticed them too. A photograph appeared online, a blurry shot of Daniel and Lena leaving the cafe together. Headlines followed, sharp and careless.
Speculation bloomed like wildfire. Who was she? What was she to him? Comment sections turned cruel. Lena read them alone that night. The next morning, she didn't come to the cafe. Daniel waited. And waited. Finally, he found her apartment door unlocked.
Lena sat on the floor, sketchbook closed, eyes hollow.
"I can't do this," she said before he spoke. "I won't be your scandal.
Or your weakness."
"You're not," he said fiercely. "They don't see me," she whispered.
"They see what's missing." He knelt in front of her, careful, steady.
"Then let me stand where you are," he said.
"Let them see through me."
She shook her head. "I've survived being invisible."
"I don't know how to survive being exposed." Daniel understood then that love wasn't about grand gestures alone.
It was about listening when staying hurt more than leaving. "Tell me what you need," he said. She closed her eyes.
"Time," she said. "And the courage to choose myself." He nodded, even as it fractured him.
"Take all of it." Days passed without messages.
Daniel returned to routines that no longer fit. The cafe felt empty. His office felt higher than ever. At night, he stared at the sketch Lena had given him, wondering if becoming that man had already cost him the woman who saw him first. Then, one rainy morning, his assistant said, "There's someone here to see you." When Lena walked in, she looked different, not healed, but steadier. Her sketchbook was under her arm.
She met his eyes without flinching. "I didn't come back to be rescued," she said. He stood, heart racing.
"I wouldn't insult you by trying."
She stepped closer. "I came because I realized something. I don't want to disappear to stay safe. And I don't want to stay small to make others comfortable."
Daniel exhaled, a sound halfway between relief and reverence. Outside, the city continued its restless movement, unaware that inside that glass tower, two lives stood at the edge of another fragile minute, one that would demand more honesty, more courage, and more surrender than either of them had ever given before. The rain streaked down the glass behind Lena like long, trembling lines, and for a moment Daniel thought she might turn back, that courage might flicker and go dark again. Instead, she took another step forward, her crutch tapping softly against the polished floor, a sound that felt louder than any applause he had ever received. "I don't know what this becomes," she said. "But I know what I refuse to be."
Daniel nodded slowly.
"Then let's refuse together." She searched his face, not for promises, but for truth. Finding it, she relaxed just enough to breathe.
"I've been offered another contract," she continued.
"The publisher wants to meet. They want me to illustrate a full series." "That's incredible," he said, and this time the joy in his voice carried no fear.
"They want publicity," she added. "Interviews. Photos."
Daniel didn't interrupt. He had learned that silence, when chosen, could be a form of support. "I won't hide," Lena said. "But I won't let them reduce me to inspiration either."
"I'm not a symbol.
I'm a person." "Then we set the terms," Daniel replied without hesitation. "All of them."
The meeting with the publisher happened 2 days later. Daniel didn't attend, not because he was ashamed, but because Lena asked him not to. She wanted her voice to arrive alone. When she returned that evening, rain-soaked and glowing, she held up the contract like a fragile victory. "They listened," she said. "Actually listened." Daniel smiled, a quiet, proud curve of the lips. "You taught them how." Life didn't soften overnight. Headlines continued, some kind, many not. Daniel's board grew restless. There were meetings filled with raised eyebrows and carefully sharpened concerns. "Your image is changing," one director said. "So is our impact," Daniel replied. Behind closed doors, deals were threatened, alliances strained. Daniel accepted the cost with an unfamiliar calm. For the first time, his success was no longer measured solely by growth charts and market share, but by the person he had become willing to be when no one was applauding. Lena, meanwhile, worked endlessly. She sketched in cafes again, sometimes alone, sometimes with Daniel quietly reading beside her. People stared. Some whispered. A few approached with clumsy kindness. Lena accepted what felt genuine and let the rest fall away. One afternoon, a young girl approached her table, her own crutch painted bright blue. "I like your drawings," the girl said shyly. "They don't make people look broken." Lena knelt, eye level, ignoring the curious glances around them. "That's because they aren't," she said. Daniel watched from a distance, understanding then that love didn't need to be loud to be revolutionary. The book launched quietly at first. Word spread not because of scandal, but because children loved it. Parents did too. The illustrations were tender, honest, unafraid of shadows. They sold faster than expected. At the launch event, Lena stood at the podium, her hands steady. Daniel stayed in the back, out of sight. She spoke not of loss, but of perspective. Not of overcoming, but of continuing. "I don't draw heroes," she said. "I draw people." Applause filled the room, not thunderous, but real. That night, as they walked home under a sky washed clean by rain, Lena slipped her hand into Daniel's. This time, she didn't step back. "I used to think being seen meant being judged," she said. "Now I think it means being known." "And being known is terrifying," Daniel added. "Yes," she smiled. "But it's also freedom." Time passed, not gently, but honestly. There were arguments. Long silences. Moments when old fears resurfaced, sharp and unexpected. Daniel struggled with relinquishing control. Lena struggled with trusting that staying wouldn't cost her herself. One evening, after a particularly brutal article questioned Daniel's leadership, he snapped. "Maybe they're right," he said. "Maybe I'm risking everything for something that doesn't belong in my world." Lena went very still. "Then maybe it doesn't," she said softly. The words hit harder than anger ever could. He realized then how easily fear could disguise itself as reason. He reached for her, stopped himself, then spoke carefully. "I don't want you to fit into my world," he said. "I want to build one that fits us both." She studied him, measuring the distance between words and action. Finally, she nodded. "Then keep building." The city watched as Daniel made choices that baffled analysts and inspired others. Accessibility programs expanded. Hiring policies shifted. Buildings changed shape, ramps, light, space where none had existed before. These were not gestures. They were foundations. People began to talk less about Lena as the one-legged girl and more about Lena, the artist. And Daniel, the untouchable CEO, was slowly rewritten as a man willing to listen. One morning, back at the cafe where it had begun, Lena sat across from him, sketchbook open. "Can I sit here just for a minute?" she teased. He smiled, reaching across the table. "You can stay as long as you want." She leaned back, eyes warm, pencil poised. Outside, the city moved as it always had. Fast, indifferent, alive. Inside that small circle of light and glass, two people continued the quiet work of choosing each other, minute by minute, unaware that the story they were still writing would ripple far beyond the cafe, beyond the headlines, and into lives that would one day whisper the same simple question that started it all. The cafe was quieter than usual that morning, the kind of quiet that feels intentional, as if the city itself had decided to listen. Sunlight spilled through the glass walls, soft and forgiving, touching the table where everything had begun. Lena sat there with her sketchbook closed, not drawing this time, just watching the steam rise from her cup. Daniel arrived without his phone in hand, without the armor he once wore so easily.
"Do you remember," he said as he sat, "the first thing you ever said to me?"
She smiled, eyes distant yet bright.
"I asked for a minute."
"And you changed my life," he replied. She shook her head gently. "No.
"You chose to change it." Outside, a little boy tugged at his mother's sleeve, pointing at the cafe window where Lena laughed at something Daniel whispered. The boy's mother smiled without knowing why. The world had shifted since those early mornings. Not loudly, not violently, but deeply. Lena's books now lined shelves across the city, across countries. Children traced her drawings with their fingers, finding themselves reflected in lines that didn't ask them to be perfect. Daniel's company became something no one had expected, not kinder in words, but fairer in structure, human in design. The city learned new shapes because of decisions made in quiet rooms. Yet the most important changes were the invisible ones. That afternoon, Daniel stood on a stage he once would have owned effortlessly. Today, he felt the weight of every eye. Lena sat in the front row, not as an accessory, not as a story, but as herself. When he spoke, he didn't speak of profit. "I was taught," he said, voice steady, "that strength looks like standing alone at the top. I was wrong. Strength is sitting down when someone asks for a minute. Strength is listening when the world tells you not to. And strength is changing, even when it costs you." The applause was long, but he only looked at her. Later that evening, they returned to the river where their hands had first intertwined. The water moved the same way it always had, indifferent to milestones. Lena leaned against the railing, her reflection fractured and reassembled by the current. "I used to think my life broke in two," she said quietly.
"Before the accident.
After it." Daniel stood beside her.
"And now?"
"And now I think it expanded," she said. "It grew edges I never knew existed." He reached into his pocket, not with ceremony, not with an audience. Just a small, careful movement. Lena noticed, raised an eyebrow, and laughed softly before he could even speak.
"Don't kneel," she said.
"Please." He smiled, relief flooding his face, and stayed exactly where he was.
He opened his hand.
Inside was a simple ring, unremarkable in its quiet elegance. "I won't ask you to complete my life," he said.
"I won't ask you to inspire me. I won't even ask you to stay forever.
I'll just ask you this: will you keep choosing this minute with me, again and again, for as long as it feels true?" Lena's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She took the ring, feeling its weight, then placed it back into his palm.
"I will," she said.
"As long as you promise something too." "Anything." "Promise you'll never turn me into a story about what I overcame," she said.
"Promise you'll let me be complicated, angry, tired,
ordinary."
He nodded.
"I promise to love you in all the ways that don't look heroic."
She slipped the ring on her finger herself. It fit perfectly.
Years later, people would still talk about them.
Some would say she saved him. Others would say he gave her a platform. Both would be wrong.
What really happened was quieter. A girl who once whispered learned to speak without fear. A man who once ruled rooms learned to share space. A city learned, slowly, awkwardly, how to make room for bodies and lives it had ignored. And somewhere in a sunlit cafe, people still asked for minutes, and sometimes, those minutes became beginnings. On an ordinary morning, Lena returned to the same table, older now, lines of laughter etched gently into her face. A child sat beside her, swinging one leg, sketching hands with fierce concentration. Daniel watched them, coffee cooling untouched, heart full in a way no success had ever achieved. "Can I sit here just for a minute?" the child asked someone nearby, voice shy but hopeful.
The stranger smiled and pulled out a chair.
Lena closed her eyes, just for a second, and breathed. Because the most magnificent endings are not the ones that shout. They are the ones that keep going, quietly, bravely, 1 minute at a time.